August 1945. The war was ending, but no one had told the soldiers in the trenches. The world was collapsing in fire and blood, but orders kept coming. Battles kept being fought. Men kept dying for causes that had already been lost. Japan fought on multiple fronts, against Americans in the Pacific, against Soviets in Manchuria, against Chinese on the mainland. The empire was disintegrating like paper in rain, but propaganda still spoke of victory, of resistance to death, of honor through sacrifice. The radio broadcasts promised that Japan would never surrender, that the divine wind would protect the homeland, that every citizen would die before accepting defeat. In the Sakhalin region north of Japan, a Japanese force was entrenched, defending strategic positions, controlling vital sea routes that connected the home islands to the occupied territories. They had built elaborate fortifications over months of backbreaking labor. 6 anti-aircraft batteries positioned in a hexagonal pattern to create an impenetrable defense network with overlapping fields of fire. Radar installed on the highest point, sweeping the sky continuously. Searchlights powerful enough to turn night into day. Concrete bunkers reinforced with steel, designed to withstand direct hits from heavy bombs. Everything designed to stop any Soviet air attack, any attempt to break through their defenses. The defense commander was Colonel Takeshi Yamamoto. He was 42 years old, his hair already turning gray at the temples, his face lined with the stress of command and the weight of too many battles. He was a veteran of campaigns in China and the Philippines, had seen real combat, had lost men under his command, had learned the hard way to respect the enemy and never underestimate them. He had been at Nanking, had seen what war could do to cities and civilians, had witnessed horrors that still visited him in dreams. But he also believed in hierarchies, in order, in the structure that held society together. He believed that some things were natural and others were against nature, that there was a right way and a wrong way for the world to work. And women in combat, to him, were definitely against nature. Women were meant to be protected, kept safe from the violence and brutality that men inflicted on each other. Takeshi had a daughter, Yuki. She was 19 years old, had been studying literature at Tokyo Imperial University before the war interrupted everything, before the government closed the universities and turned them into military training facilities. She wanted to be a writer, wanted to travel the world, wanted to live a life full of experiences and stories and possibilities. She had read every book she could find, had filled notebooks with poetry and observations, had dreamed of a future where she could contribute something meaningful to the world through her words. But the war had closed the universities, had shut down the printing presses, had transformed all dreams into the single nightmare of survival. It had transformed young men into soldiers and young women into what? Nurses, factory workers, wives awaiting news that might never come, widows before even being brides, before even having the chance to live the lives they had imagined. Yuki was angry, deeply, furiously angry at a world that said she should wait while men decided her future, that her only role was to support from behind while others made history. Angry at a father she loved deeply, but who couldn't see beyond the traditions he had inherited, who couldn't imagine that the world might be different than it had always been. She had tried to volunteer for military service, had gone to the recruitment office with determination burning in her chest, ready to do whatever was necessary to defend her country. She was immediately refused. The officer barely looked at her application before shaking his head. Women don't fight. Women support. Women wait. That's the natural order. That's how it must be. Takeshi, when he found out about her attempt, was relieved. Genuinely, deeply grateful his daughter was safe, at home, away from the horrors he had witnessed, the things that would destroy her innocence forever. He couldn't bear the thought of Yuki seeing what he had seen. experiencing what he had experienced, being broken by war the way so many young soldiers were broken. He thought he was protecting her, that keeping her away from combat was an act of love. He didn't understand why she was furious at his relief, why his gratitude felt like an insult to her. He didn't understand that protection can become a cage, that safety can become suffocation, that love without respect is another form of control. On the night of August 8th, 1945, Takeshi was inspecting his defenses for the third time that day. He was meticulous, obsessive about details, checking and rechecking everything, because one mistake could cost lives. 6 perfectly positioned anti-aircraft batteries, each with 480 mm cannons, operated by experienced crews who had trained together for months. Radar working perfectly, calibrated to detect aircraft at maximum range. Searchlights ready to illuminate any intruder. Powerful beams that could blind pilots and make them easy targets. He felt confident as a commander could feel in a war that was clearly being lost. Prepared for anything the Soviets might throw at them. His defenses were impenetrable, or as close to it as military engineering could achieve. Any Soviet bomber that tried to attack would be detected kilometers away and destroyed before getting close. He had war-gamed every scenario, planned for every contingency. Then came the first night. Around 11 p.m., when most of his men were settling in for the night shift, radar picked up something. Small contacts. Very small. Moving slowly. So slowly the radar operator thought it was equipment error, maybe birds or atmospheric interference. He adjusted the settings, ran diagnostics, but the contacts remained. Takeshi was called to the radar room, pulled from his bunk where he had just laid down after 18 hours of constant work. He looked at the screen, his eyes tired and burning, and asked what it was. The operator shook his head, his voice uncertain, saying he didn't know. The pattern didn't match any known bomber in their intelligence files. The speed was all wrong. The size was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. Takeshi stared at the screen, his military training, fighting with his instinct that something was very wrong here. He asked if they were birds, maybe a flock of something large migrating. Too big for birds, came the answer. Too organized, too deliberate in their approach, moving in formation like military aircraft, but impossibly slow. Takeshi felt ice in his stomach. The Soviets were clever, had proved that again and again. If they were sending something this strange, this unexpected, there was a reason. He ordered searchlights activated immediately, batteries on alert, gunners to their positions. But don't shoot until positive identification. He needed to know what he was facing before opening fire and potentially wasting ammunition on nothing. The searchlights swept the sky, their powerful beams cutting through the darkness like swords of light. At first, nothing. Just empty sky and thin clouds. Then, for a brief moment, one of the searchlights captured something. A plane. But what kind of plane was that? It looked wrong. All wrong. Twin engine, but small. Double wings. One above the other, like something from the previous war. It looked like something from a museum. Like an agricultural training plane that should be dusting crops, not flying over a military installation. The gunners saw it and laughed, the tension breaking into nervous humor. Is that it? Is that what the Soviets are sending? Are they that desperate that they're using antiques? But Takeshi didn't laugh. Something about it bothered him deeply, set off alarms in his experienced military mind. Why send such primitive planes? It made no sense from any tactical perspective. The Soviets had modern bombers, had proved they could build sophisticated aircraft. So why this? Unless this was exactly what they wanted him to think. Unless primitive was the point. Not a weakness, but a strategy he didn't yet understand. The thought didn't finish, because at that moment, the impossible happened. The sound of engines stopped. Simply stopped. Cut off as if someone had flipped a switch. The plane continued flying, but in absolute silence. No engine roar, no propeller noise, nothing but the whisper of wind through canvas. Gliding through the night sky like a ghost, like something that shouldn't exist in the modern world of mechanical warfare. The searchlights lost it almost immediately. They swept frantically across the sky, the operators desperate to reacquire the target, but the plane had disappeared, as if it had never existed, as if it had been a hallucination, a trick of tired eyes and stressed minds. Then explosions. One of the anti-aircraft batteries exploded in flames, ammunition cooking off in secondary blasts that lit up the night. Then another battery, further along the defensive line. Bombs falling from nowhere, from silence, from darkness. Small bombs, not the massive payloads of heavy bombers, but precise, deadly, hitting exactly where they would cause maximum damage. The gunners panicked, their training forgotten in the face of an enemy they couldn't see or understand. They shot at the empty sky, tracers arcing wildly into nothing. Wasted ammunition, shooting at ghosts, at memories, at fear itself. The searchlights girded wildly, illuminating only clouds and emptiness. The operators screaming at each other, coordination breaking down into chaos. And then, as quickly as it began, it ended. The silence returned, deeper and more ominous than before. Except for the crackling of flames at the two destroyed batteries, the screams of wounded men, the shouts of officers trying to restore order. Takeshi stood stunned, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. 2 batteries, destroyed in minutes, by planes he could barely see or hear, planes that shouldn't have been able to penetrate his defenses. He ordered reinforcements immediately, pulling men from their rest, doubling patrols around the remaining batteries. He intensified radar surveillance, had the operators watch every blip, no matter how small. He was determined this wouldn't happen again, that he wouldn't be caught off guard by invisible enemies. The next night, at 2 a.m., the attacks resumed. This time, the Japanese were prepared. Searchlights at full power from the start. Gunners in position. Radar tuned to detect anything. And then they saw them. Several planes. Old biplanes approaching in dispersed formation. The searchlights captured them. The gunners opened fire. But the planes did something unexpected. They turned off their engines. All at once. And suddenly, instead of noisy and obvious targets, there were only dark silhouettes gliding through the sky. The searchlights tried to follow them, but without engine sound to guide, it was impossible to predict where they would be. The gunners shot, but always at where the planes had been, not where they were now. More bombs fell. More explosions. More destruction. By dawn, 4 of the 6 batteries were destroyed or seriously damaged. Takeshi was devastated. His men were dead or wounded. His defenses were in ruins, and all by planes that looked like toys, that flew so slowly they should be easy targets. High Command sent messages demanding explanations. How was it possible? How could primitive planes destroy modern defenses? Then, the intelligence report arrived. The planes were Po-2s, Soviet biplanes from 1928, and the pilots were women. Takeshi read the report 3 times. He couldn't believe it. Women. They had been defeated by women. Some of his officers laughed nervously, as if the idea was so absurd it could only be a cruel joke. But Takeshi didn't laugh. He felt something different, something he didn't expect. Respect. These women had done the impossible, had flown planes that should have been easy targets and transformed them into ghost weapons, had used their very primitiveness as an advantage, had turned underestimation against their enemies. And then he thought of Yuki, his daughter, who wanted to fight, who had been refused because women don't fight. But here was proof. Women fought, and they fought brilliantly. That night, Takeshi wrote a letter to Yuki. He didn't know if she would ever receive it, didn't know if he himself would survive to see the end of the war, but he wrote anyway. Yuki, I was wrong about so many things. I thought I was protecting you by keeping you away from war, but I was just keeping you away from life. I saw something today that changed how I see the world. I saw women doing things I said were impossible, and they made it look easy. Not because they were special, but because no one taught them it was impossible. Forgive this old fool. Forgive a father who loved so much he became blind. He never sent the letter. He was killed on the last night of attacks, when the remaining 2 batteries were destroyed, but Yuki found it after the war, among his personal belongings returned by the military, and she cried, not just for the loss of her father, but for the change she saw in those words, for the openness, for the recognition. Years later, Yuki became a journalist. She traveled to the Soviet Union. She searched for the women who had flown those planes, the night witches. She found one of them, a woman named Nadezhda, who had flown 852 missions during the war. Yuki told her about her father, about how he had changed when he realized what they were capable of doing. Nadezhda listened in silence. When Yuki finished, she said, "Your father wasn't the only one who changed. We changed too. Each mission transformed us. Each bomb we dropped haunted us. We proved women could fight, but we also proved that war destroys everyone it touches, regardless of gender." She paused, choosing her words carefully. We became what we said we would never be. We became killers. We became ghosts. We became witches. And yes, we saved lives. We helped win the war, but we lost something in the process. We lost innocence. We lost the belief that violence could be clean or just. Yuki asked, "Do you regret it?" Nadezhda looked out the window at a world rebuilt from ashes. "No, because the alternative was worse. But I carry the weight. Every life I took. Every explosion I caused. I carry everything. Forever." Yuki wrote a book about the night witches. But it wasn't a book about heroism. It was a book about cost. About what happens when you force people to do the impossible. About how victory and trauma can coexist in the same heart. The book ends with her father's letter, and with a reflection. My father learned, too late, that underestimating people doesn't make them weak. It makes you blind. The night witches proved women could do anything men could, but they also proved something darker. That anyone of any gender can learn to kill, can learn to live with killing, can carry that weight for the rest of their life. The question isn't whether women can fight. The question is whether we should force anyone to fight, whether we should create worlds where the impossible becomes necessary, where people have to prove their humanity through violence. The night witches silenced 6 anti-aircraft batteries in 48 hours, shocked the Japanese high command, proved canvas planes could defeat advanced technology. But the real shock wasn't what they did. It was what it revealed about all of us. That we're capable of much more than we think, for good and for evil. That limitations are often illusions. That underestimation is a form of blindness. But also, that proving the impossible has a price. That breaking barriers leaves scars. That victory doesn't erase trauma. The Japanese couldn't believe women in canvas planes could destroy their defenses. That disbelief was their ruin. But maybe the real lesson isn't about believing what women can do. Maybe it's about questioning why we ever doubted. Why we create worlds where people have to prove their humanity. Why we make the impossible a necessity. The night witches flew through darkness and emerged as legends, but they carried the darkness with them. Forever. And maybe that's what it means to survive the impossible. You prove you can, but you pay for that proof with dreams, with peace, with the version of yourself that existed before, learning you were capable of terrible things. Sometimes the impossible happens, and when it does, it changes everything, including you.